it was all a bit of a mystery and nobody was quite sure where she was.
It was horrific. It was just very frightening.
I cannot comprehend the mind of a person who can do that.
This was the worst case scenario. It's the result that we all feared.
He had stripped her of her clothing, tried to wash any trace of him from her body, which makes the murder even more chilling.
It was so gruesome. It's just unbearable to think what that poor woman went through.
I think a lot of people were in shock. This has happened in a place that is so sleepy.
A spring day in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey.
Hello, police. How can I help?
I was working in my office and the two investigators in the missing persons unit made me aware that we had a missing girl, Kate Beagley. She had not turned up to work and this was completely out of character.
She was someone who kept in touch with friends and family on a regular basis. So the father obviously began to get worried.
He knew that she'd been out the evening before and hadn't heard from her at all on Thursday.
Her father had gone to her house and found that she'd missed an appointment with a maintenance worker.
So he took the decision to report her as missing. There's a belief that if somebody's missing for less than 24 hours, then police aren't interested. That's absolutely not the case. Every missing person case will be considered on its own merits. We look at people's previous behaviour, we look at any vulnerabilities. But with somebody like Kate, we don't wait 24 hours. Action's undertaken immediately.
While Surrey police begin the hunt for Kate, her friends also launch into action. They set up a Facebook group appealing for information and put up missing posters all over town.
The first time I knew there was something wrong, my husband and I went to get a ticket for the car and saw the poster up that she was missing. And that sort of real feeling of fear.
It was actually stuck to the car park ticket machine, and it was just a real shock.
It was horrific, absolutely horrific. It was just very frightening. It seemed very unlike Kate to not be in contact with anybody and to sort of have a gap of time of not speaking to anybody. So to go missing and not be in contact with family or friends is just not Kate. It was just not her character. So we knew when she went missing, it was serious. We then decided we must get in contact with her friends, and then we realised they were already starting the search party, and we got involved with helping with the searching.
Networking out to people I knew in the area, and then going around putting some posters up around in different places where they hadn't been. We were going to do what we could to find her.
The local press is also enlisted in the desperate hunt for Kate.
I got the phone call initially. I think it was from one of her friends. And as a local reporter, this is what we're here for. You know, the point is the local paper is part of the community. We're connected to the community. For me, any sort of missing person is a really important and vital part of our job to help spread the word and hopefully find the person. We recognised that it was going to be a big story and one that we desperately wanted to cover to try to help find her. And I went down to the scene and looked at some of the posters and just tried to see if I could get a handle on what might have happened to her. Was kind of trying to chat to neighbours, etc., to know if they had any extra details, etc.
Then we just all did our best to find out what happened. There were people already driving around the area.
Even back then, when Facebook wasn't really a big thing, it was getting a lot of traction, and the posters were getting a lot of traction as well. So there was obviously a lot of concern. And at the time, it was all a bit of a mystery, and nobody was quite sure where she was.
And you could really feel a sense of shock and panic in those people that had come together to try and help find Kate when she first disappeared. It didn't strike us at the time that she would be the type of person that would simply just disappear like this.
To those who know Kate, she's a dependable friend.
She wasn't just anybody. She was special, caring, kind.
She was always bright, very friendly, big beaming smile.
She was attractive, but she had no ego. Yeah, a beautiful soul.
At just 32, she's risen to a senior position in a national FTSE 100 company.
She was quite a high flyer. She was really going somewhere in her career. She had quite a wide group of friends. She was very, very loyal.
Her disappearance is out of the ordinary for her leafy hometown of Walton-on-Thames.
The whole kind of area was very affluent. A lot of detached properties, gated properties, very quiet and sleepy. Lots of well-to-do people, really.
People who live in the neighbourhood tend to know each other, tend to recognise each other. It isn't, by any stretch of the imagination, a crime hotspot. It's not where you would hear the backdrop of sirens, and it's not a place that's big on drama.
Just one major disappearance in Walton has in recent years hit the headlines. The 2002 abduction and killing of 13-year-old Millie Dowler.
We did feel a little bit of pressure at the beginning of the investigation, not just because you want to find Kate alive and well, but of course Walton-on-Thames is where Millie Dowler disappeared from. And it was very much a case that we wanted to reassure the community and even to show to the Dowler family and Kate's family that we were doing everything that we could to find Kate.
So behind the scenes, police are desperate to trace Kate's whereabouts. Soon they uncover something rather sinister.
Her friends had told them that they'd been receiving text messages from her phone that they felt were not from her. They said that words were being used that they didn't think she would use and phrases, and they just felt they knew her style of texting, and they were adamant it wasn't her.
As detectives search Kate's property, they uncover another curious lead.
I believe another phone was found, a spare phone, at her home address. As a result of that, some numbers were obtained which became of interest. The Missing Persons Unit investigators were ringing some of these numbers that they got without knowing who they were going to speak to.
Police home in on one recently dialed number.
That number turned out to belong to somebody who we believe she had gone on a date the previous evening with. So, assuming they met, then would be one of the last people to have seen Kate, if not the last person.
Kate's friends know little about this mysterious date.
I think we knew that the boyfriend's name was Carl, but that was about all we knew. I don't think we knew his surname. All we knew was that she met him a few weeks before at a nightclub in London. We would be thinking that maybe she had gone back home with him, but from what we heard from her family and her friends, that was really unlikely and not in character for her. So although we knew there was a person called Carl that she'd been on the date with, we weren't able to find an address for him or an employment or anything to easily find him.
But on Kate's newly found phone, police find texts from the man himself.
He had texted and she had texted to set up the date that she went on.
So detectives dial the number.
They actually spoke to Carl, who had been the man that she'd arranged to meet on a date.
It was, Kate's missing, can you help? Because we think you saw her on Wednesday. So that initial contact with him was very low-key. So Carl's initial explanation was that he did meet with Kate on Wednesday. She had dropped him off at Twickenham in her car. And as far as he knew, she was heading home.
And afterwards he'd gone back home again on the bus.
Investigators now have the man's full name, Carl Taylor. And as they dig deeper, his story about getting the bus home doesn't seem to stack up.
On one of these calls, they also spoke to Carl Taylor's mother. His mother had told them that he had turned up on the early hours of the 31st of May with a new car that she hadn't seen before. And he told her that he got it from a woman and gave some story about he was cleaning the car, and she asked him why, and he said he was cleaning it because she needed it to take the kids to school or something like that. This really raised the flag.
What he was saying just wasn't adding up.
Walton-on-Thames, Surrey. 32-year-old Kate Beagley has suddenly gone missing, sparking off a frantic search by friends and family, desperate for news of her whereabouts. Detectives have called a number in her phone, belonging to a man she dated before she disappeared. Carl Taylor.
This Carl Taylor, who she'd seen, the last person to see her, had somehow acquired a new car.
Police national computer checks reveal this car belongs to Kate.
Her car had been seen going north over Chiswick Bridge, driving erratically just before midnight on the 30th of May. An officer had seen the car and done a PNC check on it, and that was logged, and when they checked her car, this PNC check came up. So that worried us, because obviously she'd not got home, she couldn't be contacted, she was supposed to have gone straight home afterwards, but her car is going in the wrong direction.
Now Carl Taylor becomes the prime focus in Kate's missing case.
When somebody becomes of interest in a missing person inquiry in a way that suggests that some harm might have come to somebody, of course we will do all the background checks that we need to. On police intelligence databases, on partner agencies, whether we think there's a possibility of intelligence from elsewhere, we will always seek as much background information as we can about somebody. We knew that he had qualifications in terms of PE and martial arts and had worked as a football coach, so clearly a very physical man, a physically active man. From the intelligence checks that were undertaken, he had minor conviction, was known to police for other activity.
With this news, the missing persons investigators need to call Taylor again, and urgently.
So I asked them to get back in touch with Carl Taylor to arrange for us to interview and speak to him. But throughout that day, they were not able to get a reply. It was getting towards the end of the officer's shift, and they still hadn't managed to get through to him. I just had a hunch that this guy was not answering the phone because he could see that they were withheld numbers, and that he figured, already having had one phone call that morning, that it was the police trying to get back in touch with him. So I just took a chance and thought, I'll give this a go and try it with my phone, and fortunately he fell for it. And he gave a similar account to what he told the guys that morning. I wasn't happy. He seemed evasive. He was a bit vague on detail. It was a bit difficult to get an account from him. So I said to him we would need to take a statement from him, and I arranged for two other officers to go up to London to see him.
Bizarrely, Taylor asks the investigators to meet him at a party that evening in London's Holland Park. So detectives hightail it to the venue.
Carl Taylor was there, and they took him into a room where they could speak to him. But they, like me, found him evasive, and they weren't happy with what he was saying.
His demeanour, his general evasiveness, some of the irregularities in the answers that he was giving when they started to probe did cause concern with the officers.
And this went on for a while, and more people were arriving at the flat, and alcohol was being drunk, and they were beginning to get a bit uncomfortable with the situation. They were reporting back to me at Walton, and they were saying that Carl was beginning to get a bit tetchy, and they were a bit concerned for themselves. So I said to them, right, you need to arrest him on suspicion of kidnapping and bring him back to Surrey. But I was a bit worried for their safety, so I contacted the Mets and asked them to attend to be there as backup if needed.
But in the meantime, Mark's team on the ground come up with a wily plan.
The detective sergeant made some excuse to Carl to get him to come out of the flat and go down to the car. And once he was in the car with him, they arrested him for kidnapping. They brought him back to Surrey and he was put into a cell for the night. And I handed over the investigation to the Major Crime Investigation Team.
Detective Chief Inspector Mark Preston is now leading the case.
The solicitors then arranged, and we start then planning for an interview of Carl. Those interviews were urgent because this wasn't about solving a crime so much as finding Kate. There was no real variation on his story at that time which would have helped us find Kate. But nonetheless, we now had a person who we thought could have caused harm to Kate.
It's now 2 days since Kate was reported missing, and there's still no word from her.
We decided to arrest him on suspicion of murder. It's right that anybody understands the most serious allegations against them. And because now we had real concerns that something untoward had happened to Kate, I took the decision that he needed to be arrested for murder. Taylor decided to respond no comment to all of the questions being asked of him following his arrest for murder, which I think in anybody raises suspicions that we're trying to find a young lady here. We want to know that she's safe and well. Even if some harm has been caused, let's at least find her safe and well. And just to go no comment during an interview really does cause concern, I think, for anybody.
Although it looks suspicious to any hearer, is frequently as a result of a solicitor doing his duty and advising the client really to keep his powder dry for the moment.
But Taylor doesn't break his silence.
Carl was interviewed throughout Saturday and Sunday. We had attended court to obtain an extension because we needed more time with him in custody. So all the time the interviews were happening. Of course, we were trying to find things that we could use during the interview. We were trying to find evidence of wrongdoing on his part. All the time trying desperately to find Kate. It's fair to say that he protested his innocence throughout by going no comment, had made it clear to the officers between interviews, I've got nothing to do with this. So he was compliant, but absolutely not accepting any responsibility for anything that had happened to Kate, but also not assisting in trying to find Kate.
Police question their suspect about his use of Kate's car that he claimed to his mother was his. They also show Taylor damning CCTV of him refueling it.
There was the bizarre filling up with £1 of petrol at Shepherd's Bush service station. And then he was obviously very proud of its ownership and was showing off his ownership of a car belonging to Kate.
We had been obtaining evidence that really added weight to our suspicions that Taylor had done something of harm to Kate, which is why she was now missing.
Taylor had also given his mum Marks and Spencer vouchers. Background checks showed these belonged to Kate.
Carl Taylor was confronted with the amount of evidence that the police had, particularly his possession of the car and the extraordinary use of the Marks and Spencer vouchers given to his mother at 6:15 in the morning.
But still, the suspect refuses to give up his silence. He's then sent back to his cell.
People are allowed phone calls when they're in custody. It was late on the Sunday that he asked for another phone call and spoke to his mother on the phone. And that's in private. He came away from that telephone call, and our intention was to put one further interview into him that evening, which we did. I had been awake since the morning before, since Saturday, and I had literally just put my head on the pillow to go to sleep that evening, and had a phone call from one of the interviewing officers who explained that Carl Taylor had just confessed to the murder of Kate Beagley. He would take us to where Kate now was.
"27-year-old Carl Taylor has been arrested on suspicion of murder. His victim, 32-year-old Kate Beagley, whom he killed after meeting on a date. Following 2 days of staying silent, Taylor finally caves in.
Carl told us in that interview that he had killed Kate, that he had stabbed her more than once because she was defending herself by trying to attack his face. All he wanted was her car, and that's why he had initially attacked her. I don't think any of the investigation team really believed that. Given Taylor's physical background, his qualifications in PE, his martial arts training, physically he was far stronger than Kate and would have been able to overcome Kate with relative ease. He had all the attributes in the world to overcome Kate and steal her car without using a weapon. Nobody believed that as his true explanation of what happened.
But the top priority for detectives now is to finally find Kate. Her killer claims she's somewhere in Hertfordshire.
We have somebody in custody who's saying, yes, I'm going to take you to where a body is. So in very short time, we spoke to Hertfordshire, the police, because we knew he was taking us somewhere near Watford. And we had a whole convoy of police vehicles ready to go. Something like 11 vehicles on the road. The plans were that we would record Carl throughout the journey. So we obtained the services of an evidence gatherer who was videoing throughout. Of course, we had to take his solicitor with us and make sure that they were safe, that there was no chance of escape for Carl, and then the resources to be able to deal with any scene if he was now telling the truth and we were going to go and find Kate's body.
In the dead of night, the police convoy sets off, with their suspect guiding the way.
We then ran in convoy around the M25 heading up towards Watford, with Carl giving us directions and take us into a beauty spot car park called Oxley Woods. It was pitch black. It was a small car park with an entrance barrier. It was very isolated and secluded. We stopped the vehicles outside the car park because we didn't know what evidence may still be in there. And Carl led us towards the middle of the car park, and we asked him then to stop and to tell us where Kate was. He pointed to a bank of singing nettles. My role was to make sure that the integrity of the investigation was there. You have to consider what evidence might be in the bank of singing nettles. We had an officer go around the back of the stinging nettles and walk in a route that no offender would have taken. And as he was coming through that bank, he called out, "Yes, there's a body here." I cannot explain the mixed feelings that I had. There was a real sense of relief that, yes, we found Kate's body. But then there was a real sense of loss, if you like, if you're on a human scale, that this was the worst case scenario for Kate's family, for her friends. It's the result that we all feared, but none of us wanted. So there were very much competing emotions when the officer confirmed that he'd found a body.
Meanwhile, Taylor's taken back to the police car, while officers secure the crime scene.
it must have been pre-planned because it was such a convenient, isolated spot where the body had obviously been for a number of days without anyone realizing. It wouldn't just be happenstance that he'd managed to put her dead body in some nettles in a secluded place by chance. He must have recognised it, which makes the murder even more chilling.
Kate had been stabbed in the neck more than 30 times.
We couldn't identify Kate immediately. The reasons for that were some of the injuries that had been inflicted on her. Unfortunately, it was a very hot period that summer, and we couldn't physically confirm that it's Kate due to some body decomposition. So we had to wait for DNA results and later dental comparisons to confirm that yes, it's Kate.
There was very little evidence at all, apart from Kate's naked body, because it then transpired that he had stripped her of her clothing, tried to wash any trace of him from her body.
There was literally nothing else. Her vehicle wasn't there. None of her possessions that we could find were there. Search teams assisted with fingertip searches around the whole area to try and find any evidence to confirm that Carl had taken her there. We found no murder weapon, we found no property belonging to Kate, and we found nothing belonging to Carl Taylor, and we found nothing that would link to. At that time, the only evidence that we had was Carl Taylor's confession, which we'd obtained on video in the car park.
The spot where her body was found is now marked by a police tent. It's about 50 yards from the main road here. This is an area known locally as a nature reserve. It's just next to a private housing estate. The woods themselves are popular with joggers and dog walkers.
The next day, this tragic news reaches Kate's hometown, Walton-on-Thames.
I'd been down in the community trying to get some information, and then the news came from the police that they'd found the body.
We didn't know at first that it had been Kate. I understand it took some time for the post-mortem to identify her, but I think when we heard that a body had been found close to where police had been searching, we all immediately feared the worst, and sadly that turned out to be true.
Kate's friends, Heather and Tony, soon learn of the horrific developments.
Well, when we heard the news, it was desperate shock, and it was just what an absolute devastating loss.
It was so gruesome, so horrific. To think that she went through that is unbearable. It's just unbearable to think what that poor woman went through.
I just cannot comprehend the mind of a person who can do that. It's beyond me.
And I can't imagine what her family went through. It's the worst pain, particularly as a parent, to have your life just taken away in a moment, you know, without a care in the world from the other person is devastating.
It was a murder investigation, and that was tough for everyone, and I think also for the community those who didn't know her or didn't know the case might have seen the posters. That's a big shock for everyone. A lot of people didn't quite know how to handle the fact that this has happened in a place that is so sleepy.
We had a page that was inundated with people coming on and giving their sympathies either for the family or expressing their own sorrow, or in quite a lot of cases, people coming on who had read about the case, who didn't know Kate, but were still shocked and touched by what I guess her friends and her family had said about her.
Kate's killer, meanwhile, has continued to help police with their inquiries. His next offering is Kate's car, last seen by police speeding into West London.
We had no idea where the vehicle was. So Carl taking us to the car was a boost for the investigation. We knew that there was going to be evidence in the car connecting Taylor and Kate together.
So it's down the M1 to Harlesden, to a housing estate where police believe Taylor has acquaintances. Here, detectives finally find Kate's car.
There were vouchers in there which kind of suggested that Carl had been using the car for a day or so. There were Marks & Spencer's vouchers which he had given to his mum. There was property missing. So certainly finding the car and the evidence from it was certainly a very useful part of that jigsaw.
Finally, the suspect leads police to Richmond Hill, to the pub he met Kate in on that fateful evening, and across the road to a slope overlooking the Thames.
Carl took us straight to a bench on which he said is where the attack took place. There was markings in the grass that very much looked like blood staining. There was blood staining heading up the steps towards the roadway where the pub was. There were what looked like blood smears on some hand guardrails. It did look like Taylor had been telling us the truth, that that's where Kate was killed.
Investigators secure this final crime scene, and soon the blood is confirmed as Kate's.
Heather and I decided to go to Richmond to see where Kate had took her last few breaths.
It was lovely to see all the flowers and the tributes and the letters, and it was beautiful. It was a shrine, really, for Kate. It was very, very beautiful. I remember just breaking down, just completely broke down. And there were some lovely flowers, and really brings it up. It was quite heart-rendering.
Carl Taylor is finally charged with Kate's brutal murder. But 3 months later, at a pre-trial hearing, Taylor stuns the court with a not guilty plea.
Taylor had changed his explanation from one of murder to one of self-defense/suicide.
The police and prosecution will now unexpectedly have to prove Taylor's guilt.
He basically suggested that Kate took her own life and I'm the victim. That change was quite remarkable in the face of quite overwhelming evidence.
Richmond, Surrey. Fitness instructor Carl Taylor has been charged with the murder of 32-year-old Kate Beagley. Taylor stole his victim's car, then used it to dump Kate's body near Watford. He's admitted to discarding her belongings on his way home to London.
Taylor had thrown the murder weapon onto an embankment at the hard shoulder on the M1 southbound after he had dumped Kate. Our search team officers literally combed the embankment for quite a few miles to try and find the weapon and any other property that they could. They did find the weapon. Along with that were some items of Kate's clothing. There were bottles of water, which we knew Kate habitually kept in her car, which transpires that it was some of those bottles that Taylor had used to wash Kate's body. Certainly things that linked that scene back to Kate's car.
Through DNA testing, Kate's blood is confirmed on the recovered knife. But as Taylor's now pleading not guilty, investigators need to build their case. They look for more proof where Kate's body was uncovered.
We did everything we could to show that this was a sexually motivated murder, which had been affirmed to a certain extent by the fact that Kate was found naked. The forensic officers and the search team officers had to deal with certainly over 100 used condoms, all of which had to be seized in case it could prove evidence of sexual activity between Taylor and Kate. We couldn't find any evidence of sexual activity. So it was very much then for the judge to consider later whether or not they believed it was sexually motivated.
Barely 9 months after Kate's horrific killing, Taylor's trial begins at London's imposing Old Bailey.
You know, they don't send every case to the Old Bailey, so for it to be in the Bailey showed not only the magnitude of the crime, but also the interest. You had national journalists and agency workers all in the court as well. Something that you're not always used to as a local reporter, to have a full press bench and everyone, you know, tapping away and writing their notes is very different to what you're used to.
The case attracted a high degree of publicity in the public gallery. It was full, which puts pressure on everyone.
Prosecution barrister Peter Clark leads the Crown's case against Carl Taylor.
Formally, Carl Taylor had pleaded not guilty at an early hearing, and I assumed that it was likely that he would change his plea, but that was not the case. The evidence against him was so overwhelming.
So it left us scratching our heads as to what kind of defence he could come up with.
I opened the case to the jury, explaining to them that as far as the Crown's case was concerned, Carl Taylor had admitted the killing and had admitted disposing of the body.
We have to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that Carl Taylor murdered Kate Beagley rather than anything else. Beyond reasonable doubt is a high bar to achieve.
The prosecution starts by taking the jury back to when the couple met for their first fateful date on Richmond Hill.
We know that Carl and Kate had met on the 18th of May at CC's Club in London, had exchanged telephone numbers and had arranged to meet then on Wednesday the 30th of May.
There were witnesses who remember them in the Roebuck public house in Richmond overlooking the River Thames.
Then it seems Kate's persuaded to continue the date across the road to public gardens overlooking the Thames.
Carl Taylor had planned this in advance, underlined by the fact that he'd gone on this first date with a carving knife up his sleeve and also a pair of scissors, with presumably the intention of using it on Kate and not just threatening her.
Our contention all the way that this was a sexually motivated attack, that he had a knife with him, one could suppose, in order to force sexual offences to happen.
But in a sudden frenzied attack by Taylor, Kate is mercilessly stabbed 31 times in the neck, head and face.
There was no evidence that Carl Taylor had sexually assaulted Kate Beagley. Plainly, he had had no opportunity to seriously sexually assault her before he stabbed her.
The killer takes Kate's body back to her car, then chillingly packs her up into her own boot. The CCTV shows Taylor calmly refueling her Volkswagen, with Kate herself hidden inside.
The route that Taylor took that evening was from Richmond via Chiswick Bridge, heading round London onto the M1 and up towards Watford and Oxley Woods,
where he callously dumps Kate's body before bizarrely washing it.
Taylor explained to us that he wanted to clean her in a spiritual sense and leave her open to the stars. That's his explanation of why he cleaned Kate's body. The cynic would suggest it was to try and get rid of any forensic evidence.
Next is the turn of Carl Taylor's defence. The man himself takes to the stand.
By the time he goes into the witness box, all the evidence of the confession, of the use of the car, the finding of the weapon, was all before the jury. So he had, and his barrister had, I'd say, the uphill task of trying to explain away all those matters
He tried to build this picture of Kate being a very kind but somehow troubled individual, and she had decided to take her own life.
That Kate had attacked herself after bringing a knife to the scene, and Taylor had done nothing but try to help and try to intervene to stop Kate killing herself, and that he was in no position then to call for an ambulance or anything like that.
It was clear that Kate couldn't have stabbed herself that many times and remained standing, and he just didn't seem to recognise that.
The account that he gave of her suicide was not just unbelievable. It was an extraordinary thing to happen in the witness box, and it was why I felt entitled to roll up a piece of paper and invite Carl Taylor to show the judge and the jury how she managed to stab herself in the face so many times.
Initially, he refused. He said, I'm not going to do that.
Indeed, the judge said, Mr. Taylor, you're not in charge of this court and what evidence you give. I am. Will you please answer the question?
And he gave an embarrassing show of attempting to use this knife to somehow stab himself. He sort of weakly just sort of stabbed at his neck a couple of times before putting it down.
Carl Taylor effectively did no more than prod himself. It was quite clear that Taylor had been asked to demonstrate something which he had never seen.
And you could see the defence, just ridiculous as it was, but in that moment it crumbled.
When the jury retired to consider their verdict, I felt confident that we would have a guilty verdict, but certainly not 100% confident.
As a prosecutor, you always nurse a fear in the pit of your stomach that someone you regard as obviously guilty is going to be acquitted.
But the jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict.
Carl Taylor is later sentenced to life for a minimum of 30 years. Outside court, Kate's father reacts to the sentence.
I speak for us all when I say our lives will never be the same again. Our family has been devastated and life seems empty and meaningless without Kate.
After the trial ended, they took us to a pub at the end of the road, just to say thank you. It was a dad who led it, but we as a group of officers were given a standing ovation in the pub, and was the most humbling experience I've ever had. So yeah, it was justice for them. And decided to take a walk and walked along the embankment and just kind of reflected on whether it was something I wanted to carry on doing. But my experience at the trial and knowing that Carl Taylor was in prison for at least 30 years, and Kate's family and friends now know what happened to her, that made it worthwhile.
It's like an out-of-body experience, tried to turn him over, and I was scared of what I was going to see.
He was found located in a pool of blood. He'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body.
This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. Everybody couldn't believe it had happened, a murder in our village. No.
It takes a man who has a lot of hatred in them to do that to him.
He was very cunning, very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story.
It was an act of deceit. It was clear that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
On the western fringes of Shropshire lies the tiny village of Halfway House.
Shropshire's a massive county, very rural, and Halfway House is a typical Shropshire hamlet of around 900 people.
It's a really peaceful place. So, I mean, I open my front door and it's just the only thing I'll see is cows. Yeah, I love it.
Halfway House, it's a very cute village. It's very calm, tranquil. A lot of the people around there they know each other. They know everyone's business, quite frankly. It's a cute place to be.
Everyone's really good to each other. Everyone does look out for each other. The best way to describe it would probably what you'd see on Postman Pat when you were growing up, when he was around delivering his mail, and it's a real village, close-knit community.
It's a popular pit stop for holidaymakers travelling to the Welsh coast. And here you find Tony's Diner, owned and run by 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga.
Everyone really called him Mr. B. We all had difficulty pronouncing the second name, and he was well liked. Larger than life, I would say.
You'd walk in the cafe or in the takeaway, and the first thing, big smile on his face and a massive handshake. He used to greet everybody who come in there.
But becoming the diner's owner wasn't an easy journey for Satnam Singh Bluga.
Originally a taxi driver in Delhi, wanted to create a better life for himself. When he'd come over, he started working in the hotels and restaurants. My dad always had this dream. He wanted a fish and chip shop business of his own. I remember when we pulled up at the diner, this huge 96-seater restaurant, his eyes lit up, and he knew this was the one that he was looking for. As his son, I was the center of his universe, but I know for a fact he loved that diner just that little bit more than any of us, from put his heart and soul into it.
After 14 years of hard graft, it's a thriving business.
He worked at 7 in the morning till 10, 11 at night. We had a 20-foot menu. We did everything from fish and chips to sirloin steak to curries to roast dinners to pizzas. The menu was absolutely huge. You used to watch him making the pizzas and he was such a show-off. He would get the dough and he'd throw it up into the air and he'd catch it and flip it round. I think some of the people just used to come to watch the show of him flipping the pizza. I think everyone just treated it like the hub of the community, and they'd get to meet each other.
But life at the diner and in the village will never be the same.
Monday the 26th of June was a typical summer's day. It was the one day in the week that the diner was closed. And on that day, a delivery driver arrived. And the idea was that he would provide all of the stuff that they needed for the week ahead. When he turned up, he couldn't get a response.
Goes next door to the post office to ask if there's a key available for him to go into the diner to drop the delivery off. The postmistress there doesn't have a key, so she then therefore attempts to make contact with Harry.
I remember my wife calling me around 3:15 and saying, "Dad's car's here. The windows are all open, but there's no sign of Dad."
Monday is Mr. B's one day off, but he should be at home above the diner. So his son rushes back.
Come home, put my key in the door, walk straight up the stairs, right down to his bedroom, and I'm banging on the door, and he's not answering, and and I keep banging on the door, and time passes on, and there's still no answer.
Harry makes his way downstairs into the main diner.
Got a swing door into the kitchen, and instantly I can see in my mind what is just a spillage of some sort. I push the door open, and it's dark in the kitchen, and I can just see this spillage, and it's going across the ground. What I initially thought was just a spillage was a streak of blood. And then I hit the switch of the kitchen lights, and I see my dad face down. And I just remember screaming out and calling out to him. I don't know why. I think I already knew then that I wasn't expecting a response, and I went over to him and tried to turn him over. He had these just two big circles around his eyes and some injuries to the side of his face. I could see some stab wounds in his back, but I just remember touching him, putting my hand on his back, and just feeling absolutely cold.
In a panic, Harry dials 999.
And I remember ringing them and just telling them to get there quick. And they said, "Look, we want you to try and resuscitate him." I could see that there was no sign of life, and the operator kept screaming on the phone, "You have to turn him over, you have to turn him over, give him CPR." And I just kept saying to her, I can't do it, because I'd seen the injuries when I tried to turn him over, and I was scared of what I was going to see.
So Harry summons help from a neighbour next door.
She comes through the door, and I remember her first words just were like, "Oh God," and she took the phone from me and eventually saying to the operator, "Look, there's no point. To which the operator finally gave up.
West Mercia police and paramedics race straight to the diner.
Ambulance contact police to say that they are en route to a male that's been described as being assaulted and has suffered a lot of blood loss. Uniform officers initially respond to it, and upon their attendance they speak with the paramedics, and they establish that Satnam is unfortunately deceased. Once they're satisfied that there's nobody else in the premises, they then secure it for later examination by scene of crime officers and detectives.
DCI Mark Bellamy is the senior investigating officer on call. Soon he arrives on the scene.
Satnam was found located in a pool of blood. It was obvious that he'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body, causing significant blood loss. The offender, in an attempt to hide his body, had then dragged him from the initial point of where the assault had taken place to a point in the kitchen where he couldn't be easily located. Obviously, at this time, Harry is extremely upset. It's clear that Satnam has been dead for a number of hours, and performing CPR was a pointless exercise.
It was like an out-of-body experience. It's like a dream or a nightmare or something. I think not until the point where the paramedics come and the police arrive and I sit down and eventually take a glass of water just to drink. And I remember having this burning feeling in my stomach. I just felt sick and still can't comprehend what's actually unfolded in front of you.
The police now launch a murder investigation.
The first thing the police would have been thinking was, is this a robbery motive, or is there some other reason behind it?
There were a few things that were causing me a little bit of concern. The fact that the upstairs window was wide open. Was this a burglary that had gone wrong? Or was it something as simple as something closer to home?
They'd want to know who was working there. They'd want to figure out who the witnesses might be, who had come, who had gone. So they asked lots of questions, including, who were the employees and where were they now?
Soon it becomes apparent that 2 members of Mr. B's live-in staff are mysteriously missing.
I've got to build up a picture around what have they done, and where are they? Is it an innocence, absence, or is there something more sinister to it?
I was driving home from work and I've never seen so many police cars. There must have been 12 or 13 of them. A couple of ambulances there, all the lights still going. I thought, God, what's happened, you know? Phoned Mr. B up. This was on the Monday, because I'd go for a pint with him on a Monday night. I was supposed to meet him for a drink.
Mark keeps on trying, but his friend isn't picking up.
I went up the pub at the halfway house just to talk to a few locals to see if anybody knew anything, because I was a bit worried actually, you know, and nobody knew anything. Maybe at about an hour later, a couple of his relatives come up and they actually asked for me. I said, what's happening? I said, what's happened to Mr. B? And then he said to me, Mr. B is deceased. I nearly fell over. I must have turned a whiter shade of pale, you know, and because then I couldn't speak for a bit. I thought, I went outside, I thought, I can't believe this, you know.
Then people started talking and they had rumours, and I believe that they had told me it had been a stabbing.
We knew something had gone wrong. It became knowledgeable that somebody actually had died. We didn't know what they'd died of, how they'd died. We just knew somebody had been found dead at the diner.
I went back inside and I just gathered a few of the locals together and said, I've got to tell you something, Mr. B's been murdered, you know, he's dead. It's horrendous, it was, you know. God, I've never heard a busy pub go so quiet in all my life, never. This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. I think it really shook the village to the core. You know, everybody, it just couldn't believe it had happened, a murder in our village, like, you know, no.
It was almost eerily quiet in the pub. People were taken aback. They were a bit shaken about it. So we chose to just close the doors, lock up, double check the locks. The shock in the community meant that people were more, they wanted to be at home. They wanted to be secure and safe. I also think they were just shocked and saddened at the death of Mr. B, and kind of sitting in a pub doesn't quite sit right when someone's lost their life the way he did.
Following the stabbing at Satnam Singh Bluga's diner, detectives from West Mercia Police are trying to find witnesses and potential suspects.
The priority of the police, of course, in that golden hour is to collect any evidence that might lead them to whoever was responsible. So they were looking for weapons, for knives, anything that they could get DNA off, or fingerprints to prove who the killer might be. They would make inquiries to see who was in the scene at the time and whether they were still there or they'd left.
Meanwhile, detectives question Mr. B's son Harry about his father's last movements.
Inquiries were being made in the background in order for me to satisfy myself that Harry wasn't involved. We were able to do that very quickly, and we were then sort of build up that picture around Satnam's life in the last 24 hours.
I remember sitting there with the inspector, and it was just everything came out.
Police learn all's not been well behind the scenes at the much-loved diner.
Mr. B was known as a bit of a Gordon Ramsay, I think, because he was a no-nonsense person. People might have described him as being harsh. He liked the job to be done and done in a particular way.
Because he was hard-working, he also had high standards, and at times he wasn't afraid to let people know when he thought that they weren't meeting his high standards.
There'd been a couple of fallings outs with some of the staff. Someone had had too much to drink and things had got out of hand.
No one seems to know what that was about, but the end result was there was some kind of violence and tables and chairs got broken in the diner. To this day, I don't think his son Harry ever got to the bottom of that, but it left him quite concerned about the types of people that Mr. B would sometimes employ.
Some of these staff were struggling immigrants, just as Mr. B once was.
To show you the measure of the kind of man that he was, from time to time he offered work to people who came from the same part of India that he came from Punjab, and from time to time he would offer them accommodation. So he lived at the diner, and he also had rooms where staff could stay.
His phone would go off. Brother, I've been here X amount of time. I really need a job. Can you help me out? He'd come over as an immigrant himself. He was always looking for someone to rescue, and maybe he's seen a bit of himself in these people, and that's why he employed them when he did.
But Harry didn't see eye to eye with his dad.
My argument was there's no background checks. You can't obtain a reference, and you're employing people that you don't know nothing about, and you guys are all living under one roof together. And I would say to my wife, one day something's going to happen, I just can't explain it. I knew something was going to go south.
Soon, detectives learn of a sinister event. Just the day before Mr. B's found dead.
A local customer had been in the diner on the Sunday and overheard an argument coming from the back around the kitchen area, and this witness told the police that he couldn't understand the language, but they realised it was an Asian language and realised that there was a loud, raised voices, a row between two people.
By now, police have identified the two missing staff who work in Mr. B's kitchen and live above the diner. 58-year-old Belkar Singh and 30-year-old Ram G, otherwise known as Romy, who police immediately home in on.
He was young, he was fit, he was strong, and on the face of it, given the number of injuries sustained by Mr. B, it looked likely that he might be the candidate for the murder.
But Mr. B's killing is shocking news to Romy.
My friend, he ringed me and he said, this happened, Mr. B is, his body is in kitchen and he died, And I'm shaking all on that time, I remember. So my all is shaking, I'm shaking, panic, I just, how can I tell you? He is good boss. He's treat me like grandkids.
Romy returns to Halfway House, where he's questioned by police.
And he take my all statement around 4 hours. He take my all clothes, my phone, everything, I still remember. And next day, He take me in the police station, and over there I gave all statement, whatever, you know.
Romy, though, has a cast iron alibi for his whereabouts in the last 24 hours.
With Romy, it was really easy to get identify where he was. He was very open in his account with us, told us that he'd gone to Leicestershire for a music concert. We could quite easily corroborate that account through financial and through intelligence inquiries.
It became clearer every minute to the police that Romy simply couldn't have done it. The one person who was missing and unaccounted for was Belkar Singh.
Another staff member reveals more to police about Belkar Singh's movements on Sunday the 25th of June, the day before the body was found.
We know from the female worker that Romy had left about 20 to 3. She'd finished her duties just before 9 p.m. and then left. So she was able to tell us that Belkar Singh was left alone at 9 p.m. with Mr. B.
She'd seen Mr. B cashing up. He then waved her goodbye, and she said to him, "Have a lovely day off with your granddaughters." She was the last person, apart from Belkar Singh, who had seen him alive.
So detectives seized the diner's CCTV, putting Belkar Singh's every step under the microscope.
From reviewing the CCTV, we could see that just before 5:20 in the morning, Belkar goes towards the skips and he appears to deposit something in there. And then within 5 minutes, the refuse company is turning up and emptying the skips. That sort of starts to get, adds to my suspicions. And then we know at 6 o'clock he's getting into a taxi and he's dragging behind him a huge suitcase.
Police need to urgently identify what Belkar Singh disposed of and why the worker who rarely leaves the diner is making such a hasty escape.
All roads seemed to be leading to Belkar Singh. He was someone whose whole life revolved around that restaurant, and for him to just disappear like that was deeply suspicious.
Belkar Singh was nominated by myself as a suspect on the night of Monday the 26th of June. Therefore, we're then starting to focus down onto him in order to locate him, in order to try and establish why he's disappeared.
By a process of elimination, the spotlight fell on Belkar Singh, and now that he'd gone, the hunt started for him.
Halfway House, Shropshire. Restaurant owner 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga, known locally as Mr. B, has been found brutally stabbed in the kitchen of his diner.
There were in the region of 65 wounds inflicted to Mr. B by the means of a sharp-edged weapon. I just cannot understand what would go through someone's head who'd want to inflict that level of injury on somebody.
A manhunt is underway for Mr. B's employee, Belkar Singh, who's mysteriously disappeared hours before the body was found.
There was no apparent reason for Belkar to get into a taxi at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday on his day off.
But suddenly contact is made, with the prime suspect himself, by his fellow kitchen worker, Romy.
Given that Belkar Singh had disappeared literally into the night without a trace, everyone was concerned to know where he'd gone. Romy made a call to him.
I tried to ring few times and he not answer, and finally around 7 o'clock he answered.
During the phone conversation between Romy and Belkar, Romy discloses that Mr. B is dead.
He said, "Really? This is his reaction, that's it."
He didn't express any surprise to Romy, which immediately started to raise some concerns with Romy and his partner, and she took the decision to actually record the phone conversation.
Singh also makes dubious claims about Mr. B's movements the night before, the last time he was seen alive with the suspect.
He said to me, "Mr. B is going pub night time, and he eat food and then he sleep. Mr. Singh lying, Mr. B going to pub, blah blah blah." We normally just going Monday because Monday we have day off. Mr. B never ever going pub without me.
He's given an account which doesn't really tie in with what we know around what Mr. B would do. He's saying that Mr. B went to the pub on a Sunday. That didn't happen. Mr. B would go to the pub on a Monday. So we're starting to doubt the accuracy of what Belcar is telling people.
He was very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story. Even on his day off, where are you going today? If he was going north, he'd tell you he's going south. And you couldn't trust him. So obviously, all of my attention and all my suspicion went to him. That could be the only person that was with my father that night.
As police work round the clock to hunt down their suspect, they manage to trace the taxi that picked Singh up, with a large suitcase.
From a subsequent statement given by the taxi driver, Mr. Singh was dropped off at Hilltop at West Bromwich, many miles away from Halfway House. The taxi driver recalls that he went to the bus stop, he noticed that he was looking at the timetables, and the taxi driver drove off, returned to Shropshire, leaving him there.
So we're then trying to utilise the CCTV cameras to track his movements. And from there we can see that he's gone into the shop and he's bought a top-up for his mobile phone. And there are other CCTV opportunities that allow us to track him onto a bus. And from there we were able to establish that he's gone towards the Handsworth area.
Mr. Singh had got family and friends in the Handsworth area of Birmingham. It wouldn't have taken them very long at all to track Mr. Singh.
We know that Belcar had a phone with him and that we were able to track the mobile phone. Officers are dispatched, and we're fortunate that on the Tuesday morning we're able to identify Belcar leaving an address in the Handsworth area, and we follow him for a short distance where he's arrested then on the street.
The police then went into the address, and there they found that big suitcase which had a padlock on it.
The suitcase is locked. We force entry to the suitcase.
Inside that suitcase was nearly £50,000 in cash, along with gold and jewellery, all of which had belonged to Mr. B. It was clear to them that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
More incriminating evidence is seized from Belcar Singh, including Mr. B's mobile phone and some keys.
Thankfully, the keys in his possession, not only are they the keys to the diner, not only are they the keys to Mr. B's private residence, but there's also keys to the locks on the suitcase. To me, I'm starting to feel reassured that we've got the right man, and we're starting to build up that evidential picture to show his involvement.
All of these turned out to be critical pieces of evidence in the case that the police were building against him.
Without delay, Singh is taken in for questioning.
During his period in custody, Belcar was pulling out all the tricks in order to delay being interviewed. Whether this was just to try and give him a little bit of thinking time, or whether he thought that we would just go away, I don't know. But he started complaining that his brain wouldn't work if he was questioned for more than 30 minutes. He was saying that his eyes were hurting and he had to go and see an eye specialist. So we had to get him sent off to the local eye hospital for an examination. When he came back, he started to complain about the food. There wasn't enough. So he was given 2 portions of curry. Then he complained there wasn't sufficient chicken in the curry.
Whilst police deal with an awkward interviewee, rumours that the suspected killer has been arrested spread back to Halfway House. It's welcome news for Romy, who was once in the frame.
Then I a little bit relax because I live local over there, and everyone is think about me because I'm a young person, and everyone think maybe I do those things,
When I saw the fact that it was Mr. Singh, I was quite shocked and saddened that someone that Mr. B had trusted had chosen to do that to him.
It was a relief that they found somebody. And I think if I remember even myself thinking, really? Really? How did he do that? And why?
Back at the police station, Belkar Singh finally breaks his silence.
He starts to overplay some of his medical complaints. We know he's described as being partially sighted, but I believe he starts the game now of trying to overplay those vulnerabilities in an effort to say, look at me, I'm a frail old man, I couldn't possibly have committed this offence. I've learned over the years that people will try and do anything to get out of admitted to their guilt, especially of an offence such as this magnitude.
Under pressure, the suspect gives his version of events.
So initially, Belkar says that just before closing up time, he decides that he's going to go upstairs, he's going to have something to eat, which he does in his room, and then he goes to bed about 10:30 that night. He doesn't see Mr. B again. He gets up and he gets into the taxi at 6 o'clock to travel across to West Brom. He denies any knowledge of the murder of Mr. B.
So detectives press Singh about a blood-stained diner receipt, Mr. B's phone, jewellery, and £50,000 in cash that are all found in his suitcase.
Whilst he admitted that the case belonged to him, he was unable to give any account or any explanation for the items that were located within it, the items which we believe had been stolen from Mr. B.
3 days after Singh's arrest and questioning, DCI Mark Bellamy and his team are on the cusp of nailing their prime suspect.
We've recovered 2 bloodied knives from a cupboard within the kitchen at the diner. We've conducted a Home Office post-mortem on Mr. B, which says that he'd suffered a number of injuries inflicted on him by a bladed weapon. We have the fact that CCTV doesn't show anybody else entering that diner. The items of property recovered from the suitcase have now been identified by Harry that they were his father's possessions. So with that, I believe that we've got sufficient at this moment in time to go to CPS for a threshold charging decision. And thankfully they were of the same mind and gave the authority to charge Belkar Singh with the murder of Satnam.
But the hard graft for the investigators is only just beginning.
Getting him arrested and getting him charged is probably only the start of the investigation. We're now tasked with building a thorough and complete investigation in order that we can convince a jury beyond all reasonable doubt that the person in the dock has actually committed this offence.
In Shrewsbury, Shropshire, kitchen worker Belkar Singh has been charged with the murder of his boss, known as Mr. B. As police build their case for the forthcoming trial, the lab has been testing a T-shirt that was found at the diner.
On the neckline of that T-shirt was found DNA attributed to Belkar Singh.
But importantly for us, we've got airborne blood from Mr. B on the T-shirt, which shows that that T-shirt was in close contact to Mr. B when he was struck, and wet blood went through the air and landed on the T-shirt.
The police concluded that this was in fact Belkar Singh's T-shirt that he had forgotten to get rid of. It was a highly incriminating piece of evidence.
But there's something even more compelling linking Belkar Singh to the murder scene.
There's a Lonsdale trainer footwear mark within the blood. Now we're told by at least 2 witnesses that Belkar Singh wore Lonsdale trainers. We never found any Lonsdale trainers, and it's my view that at 5:13 when he's going to the skip, he's depositing his Lonsdale trainers into the skip and they're subsequently taken away by the refuse company. So unfortunately we never recovered those.
As cunning as he was, Mr. Singh knew that the bins were collected on a Monday at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning.
Belkar Singh denied that he ever wore them. He said he wore some Skechers.
It was those shoes that would be the downfall of Mr. Singh.
Not only have we got witnesses telling us that he wears Lonsdale trainers, but we've also got him on CCTV on the Sunday, going into the post office earlier in that day, and he's wearing Lonsdale trainers. So he's lying.
And Singh's Lonsdale trainers would provide police with the final piece of the forensic jigsaw.
They identified some footwear marks leading away from the blood pool towards 2 kitchen cupboards. When they opened up the kitchen cupboard, located within there were 2 knives. We were able to establish that Mr. B's blood was on the handle and on the blade of one of those knives.
Barely 6 months after Mr. B's horrific killing, Belkar Singh is brought before Stafford Crown Court, accused of murder.
Mr. Singh denied all responsibility and had pleaded not guilty, and now had to face a jury with the evidence.
The prosecution sets out its case. Belkar Singh is portrayed as a man in debt, on edge as he's long overstayed his work visa. The murder of Mr. B is his way out of his predicament.
The prosecution explained that it was planned by Belkar Singh, although appearing quite frail and unassuming, had somehow, out of some jealousy, planned to kill Mr. B for his life savings.
We know that he was sending money back home, and therefore there was a motive now around finances.
It all suggested that this was a crime that had been motivated by naked greed. He was a poor man. He was trying to keep his family in India back home. He decided that the only way to get his hands on all that cash was to dispatch Mr. B, but he did it in the most extraordinarily brutal fashion.
Knowing he'd be left alone with Mr. B on the night of Sunday the 25th of June, Singh seized his moment to pounce on his victim.
The belief was that he'd been hit over the head with a metal pan in order to daze him before he was stabbed. He was attacked with at least 3 different knives, including a meat cleaver. It was clear that he'd been on the receiving end of a frenzied and brutal attack.
Having carried out this terrible attack on Mr. B, Belkar Singh's had the forethought to rifle through his trousers and remove the takings from the till receipt and the keys from his trouser pocket, which then enables him to go upstairs into Mr. B's private room and gain access to it, and therefore take the jewellery and the remainder of the cash.
While my dad was lying there in the kitchen with all his injuries, for all I know, he probably got himself a few hours kip before he got up and left the next morning. The state of mind to do that baffles me. Absolutely baffles me.
Now it's the turn of Belkar Singh's defence.
We were faced with a mountain of evidence. It's difficult representing someone in those circumstances, but it's important that everyone who stands trial in one of our courts has a fair trial and has someone representing them who is going to do the best job that they can. In presenting Belkar Singh's case to the jury, we emphasised the fact that he was so small and with such terrible eyesight, all of which was documented by his optometrist, that he couldn't be the sort of person who would commit this crime. He moved very slowly. Witnesses who worked with him said that he was like a sloth. The jury were clearly puzzled by all of this.
And when Singh is asked to take to the stand, he makes the most of his moment.
When he would walk over to give his statement, he'd make sure that his steps were small, calculated, maybe bump into a table on the way. Mr. Singh was very clever in front of the jury to maintain the act.
Faced with the forensic evidence placing him at the murder scene, Singh changes the story he first gave detectives.
it became impossible for Belkar Singh to maintain his story that he hadn't seen the killing or been part of it. And so he made up a new one. He told the court when he gave evidence that in fact what had happened that night was that he had been in the kitchen with Mr. B when two intruders had come through the side door.
They came in through a door that wasn't covered by the CCTV, and they started to have an argument with Mr. B. This was an argument over an old business transaction which resulted in them attacking Mr. B and killing him with knives.
He tried to intervene, but he couldn't. Once the violence had ended, they took him upstairs, frog-marched him to Mr. B's bedroom, and then ransacked his room. The jewellery, the gold, the cash, everything was stuffed into a suitcase.
And this is where it gets slightly fanciful, is that they tell Belkar Singh, we know where you live, we know where your family are in India, you're going to take all this money away from the diner, and at some stage we'll catch up with you later and you can give us the money.
It was an extraordinary story, but it was the only one that he could come up with.
The prosecution, though, is having none of it.
The question was put to him if these fictional characters that had come into the diner, why were their footprints never found? To which he spinned another yarn and come up with a very unbelievable story.
They had taken their shoes off to go upstairs. Well, they're really considerate murderers now, aren't they? That they don't want to get blood on the carpet of Mr. B's upstairs apartment. It was incredulous.
After weeks of high intense court drama, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
It was a very lonely place to be. Day after day we would sit there waiting for a decision, and there was still no verdict. Thinking, when is this all going to end?
A real emotional roller coaster. And the moment that when the jury returns, well, that's where my head and my stomach are absolutely turning, if I'm honest.
The tension was extraordinary. No one knew what the outcome would be until the foreman stood up and said the word, guilty.
Finally found guilty, and we could draw a line underneath it.
The jury comes to the rightful conclusion, and it's an immense sense of relief.
Belkar Singh is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 27 years.
I remember when the sentence was read out, Mr. Singh just dropping to his knees, and it was some satisfaction in the devastation that I'd seen in him. The only people that are left suffering are the immediate family that have gone through it, and that never ever leaves you. It never ever leaves you.
Harry has since sold his father's beloved diner.
I still dream of my dad. He's running around in the diner, serving customers. When you lose that one person that treats you like the center of their universe, and then one day it's gone, you never really come to terms with it, but you have to live with it, I suppose.
It was just frightening that something serious had happened on our doorstep.
This was a crime of passion. Everyone was gripped by it and wanted to know what happened.
It's quite unusual for somebody to have this sexual preference, but it's also extremely dangerous.
To hear someone doing that, stabbing someone ferociously when they're dead or dying, it was something quite horrific.
There's a heavy price to pay for that, all because of jealousy.
This was an unusual murder. It had sex, violence, jealousy, betrayal. It had all the hallmarks of a crime thriller.
My mum is heartbroken. She'll never be the same person ever again.
A quiet Sunday morning in the sleepy Hampshire district of Lee Park.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, the police received a 999 call from a very distressed young lady.
Somebody's had their throat slit at an address in Lee Park.
The police had to go to the house very quickly.
Having a call of this nature is highly unusual. Is this false and malicious? Is this somebody just having a prank on the police's behalf? I think the officers will be going there with an open mind, but with some trepidation as to what are we going to face when we get to this address. Police arrive at the address and they knock on the door. They can hear dogs barking and the door is opened.
Hello. You all right? Yeah. What's going on?
The police officer went inside the house.
Don't close the door.
One of the officers goes upstairs.
Had some kind of strange, interesting call about somebody having had their throat slit.
And they find a body in the bedroom.
The residents of Botley Drive soon find out something is afoot.
The place was swarming with police vans, police cars, whatever. They were all over the place.
You know, you couldn't see this side of the road because all the police cars were parked there, and you think something's happened.
It was quite overpowering, and you sort of wanted to know what was going on, but you didn't want to ask.
And you could see the activity, scenes of crime, and pathologists and all that sort of thing were there, and it was just frightening that something serious had happened on our doorstep.
Word spreads to the local Portsmouth press.
So we received a tip-off that there was a serious incident taking place in Botley Drive. We sent a reporter out to go and investigate. The reporter went down to the scene, spoke to locals in the area. So it's quite clear this was a major incident. So there's lots of rumours swirling around. Some people thought possibly a stabbing, but it was all a big mystery.
The house is sealed off and the crime scene secured.
Normally when a police tent and cordon is erected, it normally means one thing, which is that someone's been killed.
The last thing on my mind was that it was a murder. To find out at the end that it was somebody had been stabbed, you know, it was quite shocking.
Yeah, it's awful. Right on your doorstep. Think of it not happening in this area, but one day it could be.
Everyone just said, oh, there's loads of police, I don't know what's going on. And then that's when the speculation came and the rumours came.
No one actually knew what had happened. It was just an incident that caused a lot of fear, basically, and shock. There was a lot of questions being asked. People were concerned, and some people felt unsafe as well because potentially there was a murder on the loose. So it was an incident that brought the community together and caused a lot of concern.
Soon, senior detectives arrive on the scene.
In the background, there'll be checks going on. You know, do we know anything about that address? Is it an address we go to on a regular basis? Are there people living in that address that the police will know that they've dealt with before? You go with an open mind, but if there's no information coming back to suggest that, you know, this address is well known, we're always going there for domestics, you need to sort of have your wits about you.
At this address in Botley Drive lives 27-year-old mother of one, Shay Groves.
She had a young child who was 5 years of age. She was living with a friend. She wasn't working. From the age of 11, she was wearing hearing aids in both the ears because she was partially deaf.
In the last 6 months, Shay's been in a relationship with dad of 2, Frankie Fitzgerald.
In February 2022, they met at a pub in Caution. And it looks like they clicked. He sent her a number, she rang him. At that stage, she was just getting out of a relationship. But she wanted something exciting. And Frankie came along and gave her the excitement.
But investigators uncover a string of texts, suggesting all is not well with the budding romance.
There was evidence of Frankie being dominant towards Shay. There were lots of text messages to Shay telling her what to do.
He had a jealousy towards Shay Grove's ex-partners. And he felt that she was actually seeing other men behind his back. There was a sense of distrust. She distrusted him because she still felt that he was still going out and getting in touch with his ex-partner.
It was established that around about April time, so 4 months into the relationship, that by now it really deteriorated, where Frankie's obsession and jealousy was getting worse and worse. Quite often it would end up in a really heated argument, to the point where we know Frankie had threatened violence against Shay and also threatened violence against her ex-partner as well. So much so that Shay was concerned that she shared this information with her friend because I think she feared for her safety at times.
A background check on Frankie reveals he has history.
In the past, there were cases of domestic abuse that the police had investigated, and I think he'd been convicted on one occasion.
Frankie had been before the magistrate's court in 2018 because he had sadly assaulted his ex-partner. And not only that, he had also damaged a mobile phone, the consequence of which he pleaded guilty to assaulting the ex-partner and stealing her mobile phone. There was a restraint order against Frankie imposed in 2018 that he should not be in contact with the ex-partner.
As details of the couple's relationship emerge, it's not long before police confirm they are in fact dealing with a murder.
The body is wrapped up in a duvet on bin liners in the bedroom with serious neck injuries that were non-survivable.
In Lee Park, Havant, at the home of 27-year-old Shay Groves, Hampshire Constabulary have discovered a body. The victim, 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald. The father of 2 has been stabbed 20 times.
Frankie underwent a forensic post-mortem. This is whereby an autopsy is carried out and forensic evidence is also captured from the deceased, but also a trained pathologist can try and interpret some of the injuries. And what was noted was that Frankie had had this fatal blow to the neck, but then there was also 19 other injuries around the chest area that wouldn't have been fatal because he was probably already dead by the time the first stab wound went into the neck.
The evidence would have suggested that effectively the main cutting that caused his death occurred around the throat area because it went across from left to right and cut the voice box, putting it simply. And then it caused torrential bleeding. It was so fierce, he would have bled out.
While forensic officers continue to comb the scene, a police presence is stepped up in the area to calm this close-knit community reeling from the news.
It's frightening to think that that sort of thing happens. And it's a real friendly neighbourhood.
It was a sort of strange quietness, like you'd lost somebody. It was like a cloud had come down over everything, and everybody was under that cloud.
Several miles from the murder scene lives Frankie's family. tragically unaware of the events unfolding in Lee Park.
I was at my mother-in-law's having a barbecue. Then my mum turned up and the first thing she said to me was, "Have you heard from Frank?" And I said, "Mum, he's probably asleep." I said, "He's probably sleeping a hangover. His phone was off, his phone's never off." My mum was probably there for about an hour. She got a phone call from the police to say, "I'm ringing about your son." And my mum said, "What one?" And they said, "Frankie." So I took the phone and they said, "Is this Carla, Frankie's sister?" And I said, "Yes, like what's going on?" So they said, "We need to come and see you."
The police officers make their way to the family home.
We was outside and my mum was obviously pacing up and down. They asked us to go inside and go into the bedroom. And the words that they used was, "We found a deceased man in a house in Havant with a slit to his throat." And my mum just collapsed on the floor. And I was just shouting, saying, no, this is not true. It was just bizarre, like, my little brother's been murdered. I still can't get my head around it, but it was just awful seeing my mum like that.
He had 2 children from previous relationships, and yes, in the past he was known to the police for domestic abuse, but it appeared that he'd been turning his life around. He'd moved on. He had a good relationship with his children and a good relationship with his children's mother.
He was an amazing dad. He always went out of his way to get what they needed or to see them and take them out for days. There wasn't a day really that I didn't see him. So I just miss his big grin he had on his face, knocking my door really loud. And I'd know it would be Frankie knocking, or when he went slamming the door. He was just amazing, and he didn't know how amazing he was. And I wish I could tell him.
The family were absolutely devastated, but everyone was rallying round to help the family, help his friends, and to raise as much money as possible for his funeral.
Meanwhile, detectives have been focusing on the bedroom where Frankie's body was found. Items discovered at the home of girlfriend Shay Groves begin to ring alarm bells.
She had numerous pictures on her wall of famous killers. You had Charles Bronson, Myra Hindley, Rose West, the Yorkshire Ripper, numerous books. This is not normal.
Shay was someone who had an interest in knives. She had axes.
And scenes of crime officers find a potentially lethal air gun in one of Shay's bedroom drawers.
On the right side of the bed, she had a coffin-style bookcase which had all the gang killings and gangland people and so forth.
It was very dark and twisted, I suppose.
Elsewhere in the house, even coffee cups reveal this morbid fascination.
Shay Groves was someone who was obsessed almost with true crime documentaries. She had a fascination with serial killers, killing.
We've noticed from looking at previous social media pictures that over the last couple of years, her appearance started to change. She went from wearing sort of bright clothes and being sort of quite outgoing to started going in on herself and becoming almost gothy. Dark clothing, lots of dark makeup. She started to have tattoos, very visible tattoos. So visible you can see them on her face and on her neck. So there's obviously something going on in the background there that's making her change her appearance like that.
She became a god as we understood it, as a result of her becoming friendly with a partner who was a boyfriend around that stage. They were both goths. They had a weird sense of humor in a sense that they were dressing up in goth clothes and all that. They also were practicing pagan practices, and she had a Celtic dagger with her, which was supposed to be for pagan practices.
Back at the crime scene, police uncover more disturbing evidence.
Also within Shay's home were a number of CCTV cameras, Now, ordinarily, a CCTV camera would be facing the outside and it will be there as a crime prevention type of mechanism to stop intruders breaking into your house. But what was particularly strange about this case is that Shay actually had them set up inside the house.
Shay had CCTV video cameras in her bedroom, in the lounge, in the kitchen. The ones in the bedroom were used to record her and Frankie having sex. They would then watch these videos back and then carry out what they had seen.
The police recovered a number of videos.
There were CCTV footage of them committing violent sexual acts together. It involved sexual acts of what's known as BDSM, bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism.
What we established that was common between the two of them was that they had this almost unhealthy sexual interest, and it's unusual to try and find a partner that has the same sort of sexual preference as you. So the fact that these two had this thing in common made it quite unique, but also extremely dangerous.
Miss Groves had a passion for kinky sex to the extent that she likes knives being used on her, knives being run over her, and so forth.
One of the elements of there was a thing called knife play. Now, this is where they would act out a sexual act where one of them is in possession of a knife and holding it to the other's throat whilst they have sexual intercourse.
The footage reveals these dangerous sexual games are fueled by Class A drugs.
Frankie and her very quickly got into the habit of cocaine. And cocaine became the center point of the relationships, whereby they were sniffing cocaine and having sex and videoing their sexual acts. They were exploring their sexual acts to the very limit with the use of cocaine and other things.
Shay and Frankie's mutual interest in rough sex and BDSM dominated the relationship. The boundaries became somewhat blurred, I think, with what they were doing. So there'd be a lot of role playing. Shay would be someone who enjoyed being spoken down to and humiliated. Frankie would regularly spank her and talk to her in a derogatory fashion. And this was something that consumed the relationship and was the cornerstone of the relationship.
They signed what's known as a sexual contract. I called it the 50 Shades of Grey sexual contract because it resembled everything of it. In it, it gave Frankie the permission to wake up Shay Groves every morning with sex. It was signed by Frankie Fitzgerald, signed by Miss Groves, and countersigned by the friend.
One of the videos that the police recovered from the address was a particularly brutal sexual act between the two parties, and that is really, really disturbing. With a knife, one doesn't have to describe any further how high risk that is, particularly when one of the parties or both of the parties may be high on cocaine or alcohol.
As detectives trawl on through Shay's sordid CCTV footage, they're drawn to something rather sinister. Her lethal Celtic dagger appears in the unlikeliest of places.
There were evidence that we found from CCTV footages where she actually puts the knife underneath her bed, underneath a pillow. On one occasion, after sex, Frankie Fitzgerald actually saw the knife. He says, "Why do you have it? Do you intend to stab me in the throat?" And what is the coincidence of Frankie Fitzgerald saying, "I'm going to stab you in the throat," and Frankie Fitzgerald being actually stabbed in the throat later on within a few weeks?
Police have no option but to make an arrest.
What's going on?
Sorry,
No, don't close the door.
They turned up and Shay Groves was there in her pink dressing gown, smoking a cigarette, acting as cool as you like.
This was an unusual reaction. When she was talking to the police officers, she was as if nothing was wrong.
It didn't appear surprising that the police were there. It's almost as if she knew they were coming.
Shay Groves told them that there was a body upstairs.
Absolutely no tears, nothing. No concern for him anything of that nature. It was a chilling video, a chilling body-worn camera to actually watch.
Arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court, and anything you do say may be given evidence. The necessity for your arrest is for a prompt and effective investigation. Okay.
But when the officers arrested her on suspicion of murder, she didn't put up a fight. She then directed the officers to say where the weapon was. And sure enough, there was this Celtic dagger still in the sink with blood on it.
Lee Park, Havant. 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald has been found dead with his throat slit in the bedroom of 27-year-old Shay Groves.
Mum is heartbroken. We haven't just lost Frankie, we've lost our mum too. She'll never be the same person ever again. Yeah, he was very special. He was special to everyone. And it's just a void that's going to be in the rest of our life. Well, our hearts are going to be breaking for the rest of our life.
Arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention...
Mum of one, Shay, has been arrested on suspicion of murder.
After she was arrested, she was taken to the police station, and at the police station, she was seen by a registered nurse.
Shay was then subjected to a number of police interviews during the course of her time in custody.
She slowly went on to have legal advice. And during the course of the first interview, on the advice of a solicitor, she made no comment.
In the meantime, detectives have been questioning one of Shay's friends. In a bombshell interview, the friend reveals a strange video call she had from Shay straight after the killing.
You then have this bizarre situation where Shay's starting to giggle and saying, "Can you keep a secret? I've done something. Can you keep a secret?" And she proceeds to walk upstairs, still on FaceTime with her friend, and then turns the camera to show her Frankie's lifeless body on the floor with clear stab wounds around the neck and says words to the effect of, "I've done him, I've done him." She's always described as having a bit of a weird sense of humour. So initially she's thinking, is this one of these pranks that Shay might pull? You know, is this just some sort of weird thing that she's just trying to pretend that they've had some kind of game and Frankie's pretending to be dead? So she doesn't quite believe her, and you can see why. But Shay then gets the camera phone and actually puts it really close to Frankie's body, so she can really see the graphic images of the injuries that she's caused towards Frankie.
She was showing the blood spots on the books themselves and says, blood here, blood there, blood here. That's what the police officers found. What they also found when the first police officer went up to the room, apart from finding the body, they had this pungent smell of bleach, where there was an attempt to clean up the place, because the friend was telling the police officers when she was being video interviewed that she actually saw her with a bowl with water trying to clean the place. She had taken the camera towards the kitchen area, towards the sink, and shown her the knife where she used the murder weapon.
In the same video call, the friend claims Shay also admitted to stabbing Frankie while he slept. Detectives put this to Shay during her interview.
And so they were putting questions to Shay that effectively she had murdered Frankie in his sleep.
Her attitude during the second and third interview completely changed because she was so arrogant. And she was using words like, "Look, don't waste my time." I'm paraphrasing it. "Don't waste my time. I know what I'm here for."
Strangely, she started talking, and actually one of the questions she then fired back at the police officers was, well, if I killed him in his sleep, why is there no blood on the bed? As we know, Shay was obsessed with true crime documentaries. She would be aware of forensic evidence and how to dispose of forensic evidence. Now, what we do know is that Frankie's body had been moved and been wrapped up in a duvet. So I think the inference there is that it's likely that if Frankie was sleeping, he was sleeping on top of the duvet and he was stabbed and she's then wrapped him in the duvet and then transported him from the bed to the floor on top of the bin liners. She's forensically aware because of her knowledge of all these true crime documentaries that she watches. She knows that by wrapping the body in bin liners, it's less likely to leak fluid into the house.
Shay effectively leaves no trace of Frankie's blood on the bed.
What is even more interesting about her demeanor was the fact that she's told the police officers, "You will find things about us in the video." She says she had been suffering from the months of sexual abuse that she'd been suffering from Frankie Fitzgerald. The abuse in a sense that it was violent sex. She was raped by him. She didn't consent to rape.
Shaya started to hint that she may have been a victim of sexual violence from Frankie and that this attack was due to her defending herself.
Shay was now trying to form a defence, and that defence was self-defence. So in effect, what she is saying is that she was being attacked by Frankie, and in order to protect herself, she had to inflict harm on him to stop him harming her.
What happened was that he went towards her and grabbed her in the bed and strangled her, and she was losing consciousness. She then struggled to find something to hit him with, and she thought she found a box, and she was trying to hit him with the box. Turned out it was a knife, and she stabbed him. It was sheer arrogance, something that you don't normally find when someone is saying, "I've been a victim of abuse, I've been a victim of coercive control, and I killed somebody." Not a shred of emotion.
Whilst looking into Shay's abuse claims, detectives dig deeper into the background of their suspect. Although she paints herself as the victim, the truth isn't quite what it seems.
We established that Shay would often carry a knife, and she would self-harm on occasions, small cuts in her legs and that kind of stuff. But also she would threaten violence against others, and there are a number of occasions that are reported whereby Shay had used violence against other people, or at least threatened violence against other people. And the fact that she secretly carried a knife with her wherever she went is a real concern.
Friends reveal Shay called her housemate Chucky after the knife-wielding killer doll in the horror film Child's Play, and more sinister details are revealed to the police.
It was a strange relationship. Shaya had a lot of emotional control and influence over her. Her friend was subservient and would do whatever she wanted. She'd run errands, even put on Shaya's socks for her.
She would effectively use her as a house mistress to look after the house, clean up, and on one occasion, I believe she was made to tie Shay's shoelaces for her. You know, that is strange behaviour.
And what Shay Groves did was that she treated her as a slave. Slave in every sense of the word, where she screamed at her, she got her to do her washing, ironing, cleaning, feeding her child, go out and buy food. The dynamics was in such a stage where she was effectively controlling her.
On a couple of occasions, Shaya turned violent towards her as well.
On one occasion, she pulled her around the hair and dragged her throughout the house because the friend had gone out and had not told her where she was. On a second occasion, what she did was that she picked up a nail clip and hit her on the head that caused her to bleed. Her friend saying she can blow hot and cold, she can be violent at 1 minute, and within seconds she can turn out to be a normal person.
The police identified controlling behaviour, but they also identified manipulative behaviour. And it transpired that Shay had told a number of people, including Frankie, that she was suffering from cancer and that she was undergoing treatment. And it just didn't exist. It was completely fictitious.
And that is the most vile thing that anybody can think about. And she's manipulating all this and trying to get sympathy, money, and all these kind of things on the pretext of cancer. It is a heinous act.
But according to her acquaintances, Shay's deceit didn't stop there.
One of the chilling and telling features about Miss Grove's personality was her ability to use these sexual footages that she had taken of her having sex with Frankie Fitzgerald, her ex-partner, to manipulate them and to blackmail them to do things. She actually manipulated Frankie Fitzgerald by saying she's going to publish this to the newspapers. There was one occasion where there is the CCTV footage that the police found, and she actually said, if I show this to the police, they will think that you are abusing me.
Shea made threats to post them on social media due to her jealousy and problems in the relationship with Frankie, and wanted to ruin his life.
Shay even sent the sex video to her friends.
It was showing a very violent sexual act taking place without the consent of the other party. So in effect, Shay was being raped by Frankie, and that just wasn't the case. The police were able to get the original footage of this video, and when they analysed it, it was clear that the footage had been edited by Shay.
It was consensual sexual acts, and what she had done is that she had manipulated a number of footages by cutting and pasting them out of time and sending them off to their friends, saying this is how he's been aggressive towards me.
Soon, detectives uncover a chat between Shay and a friend, accidentally picked up on her CCTV. In it, Shay discusses ways to cause Frankie serious damage.
Having received this information that Shay is getting to a point where she wants to either cause Frankie harm directly or get somebody else to cause harm towards Frankie, that really does start to rub against a defence of self-defence that she is starting to show. It's starting to now show a pattern of perhaps this is pre-planned. Jay Groves is charged with Frankie Fitzgerald's murder, and a trial date is set at Winchester Crown Court. She attends court. The charges are put towards her, and the defence claim that their client, Shay, is going to be pleading self-defence and also diminished responsibility. And so the prosecution now have to disprove that this was not a case of self-defence or a momentarily loss of control, that this was actually cold-blooded, pre-planned murder.
Six months after the killing of Frankie Fitzgerald in Lee Park, Havant, his girlfriend Shay Groves finally faces justice at Winchester Crown Court. The atmosphere is fever pitch.
There's a lot of public interest in the case, a lot of media there. This is obviously a big story, a national story. A woman who was interested in serial killers, gangsters, true crime. So this was an unusual case and had a lot of interest as a result.
Shay's plea remains not guilty.
And the defence was self-defence as a starting point, and if she was successful, it would have led to a full acquittal, so she would have walked out not guilty verdict. The two defences that reduces murder to manslaughter are loss of control and diminished responsibility. So she would still be sentenced, but the sentence would not be as high as a sentence for murder, which is a minimum term of life.
With the stakes so high, Frankie's sister Carla is also at the trial.
It was horrible, and obviously just straight after Christmas, obviously the first Christmas without Frank. So yeah, it was really difficult. I had like an anxiety attack. I had to go outside. It was a bit much for me. I couldn't really deal with it. I was really nervous. Obviously, I've never been to a court or even a murder trial.
The prosecution needs to prove that Shay killed Frankie in cold-blooded murder.
In the bedroom, unusually a few weeks before the killing itself, the cameras have been taken down. So we had to rely on telephone evidence, WhatsApp messages, conversations, a camera that was in the kitchen, the housemate's bedroom, noises in the background. And this, the police officers and we as a prosecution team sat down together and worked together to produce a timeline from the time Frankie Fitzgerald came into the house.
Using this patchwork of evidence, the court relives the last 24 hours of Frankie's life.
So on Saturday, the 16th of July, 2022, we know that Frankie goes to Botley Drive to visit Shay. They're taking cocaine, they've taken alcohol. Again, it's just building up to be this real pressure cooker environment.
I see the CCTV and her and Frankie were in the kitchen playing music and talking, and obviously the songs that he played were the songs he played with me, so that really hurt that they were the last songs he would ever hear. So yeah, that was really heartbreaking.
At about 3 o'clock in the morning on Sunday the 17th of July, Frankie and Shay are both still having arguments about ex-partners.
And obviously we heard her call him up to his own death.
She calls Frankie to come to bed. He goes upstairs and falls asleep. While Shay's going through Frankie's phone, she uncovers a message where a female purporting to be 13 years of age has been contacting Frankie through social media. Now, Shay clearly loses it as a result of seeing that message and gets extremely jealous. But what she didn't know was that Frankie had actually blocked that individual because of the age. What she also didn't realise was this girl was in fact 17. But that was the final straw that broke the camel's back.
And within a few minutes later, there was the scream.
And she stabs him in the neck.
And then afterwards, she then delivered another 19 blows to his heart and chest area, all of which would have been fatal in themselves.
In a fit of rage, it was a brutal action by the defendant. And the friend said that she had sent a message to her at 5 o'clock in the morning saying that Frankie had left her and there was a big fight. Words to the effect like, he's gone, he's left for the day. The import of the message was that she was setting up a lie.
But then Shay changes tack, video calling her friend to gloat in the killing. And it was Shay's friend who decided to turn her in.
And the moment she called the police, it was the recording that we played to the jury, which had such a chilling effect, explaining what the defendant had told her about the lies she had created to set up an alibi.
Shay had made admissions to her in the FaceTime call saying that he was asleep, and that's when she stabbed him. Shay had made various threats in the past to harm Frankie. If your victim is asleep, how can you feel threatened so much that you have to defend yourself by fatally stabbing somebody? The prosecution were able to show that self-defense just wasn't possible.
Next, it's the turn of Shay Groves herself to take to the stand.
She came across as a very assertive, very controlled, very informative, well-versed with the case. So she was the sort of person who could look after herself. And that portrayed a person who could not have lost control at all.
She came across as rather bolshy and cold and a bit arrogant. She was certainly giving it back to the prosecutor.
When she gave evidence, her reason for why she had told her friend that Frankie was asleep was because she was trying to protect him because of his reputation, children. She didn't want to say anything about him being excessively violent towards her. And now when she walked into the witness box, she was telling the real truth, which we did not accept.
And her version of the truth was that, her and Frankie had been fighting.
She said she had been pinned on the bed, she was struggling to breathe.
She had reached out to get a money box, but accidentally grabbed a dagger and stabbed him in the neck. I mean, it's almost laughable listening to this account.
But the court is stunned by what Shay says next.
When she gave evidence, she actually admitted that she could actually see him gurgling with blood, and she stabbed him to prevent him from gurgling. In a sense, she was doing him a favor by sending him off.
It's quite a strange thing to hear in court, to hear someone doing that, stabbing someone ferociously when they're dead or dying. It was quite harrowing to hear.
But in dealing with Shay's abuse claims at the hands of Frankie, there are even more harrowing moments for the jury.
There was a sequence of CCTV footages that we had to play to the jury. He was smacking her, and she was saying, "Yes, Daddy, what's my punishment, Daddy?" And he was having sex with her, and then she was crying. It was horrific to look at. One or two jurors actually were in tears when they saw this. But what the prosecution said, what the Crown said, was that this was all consensual.
She didn't really have a defence, to be honest. He was innocent. He didn't deserve to go like this. No one does.
What we told this jury was that this is a manipulative, jealous, cunning woman, and her jealousy led her to killing him. And that is the reason why he died. This is not a case of self-defense.
The jury retires to consider its verdict.
The jury retired for 4 days. To some people, it was the most agonizing 4 days because you didn't know what was going through their mind. When they came in, it was a hushed courtroom. And this is the point where it's like the drum roll moment.
The verdict was guilty. And it was just the best feeling ever.
And at that point, or in the moments afterwards, while Shay was still in the dock, she smiled, which I found something to be a rather strange reaction, considering she was now going to be spending many years behind bars.
My mum just broke down. Obviously, we were happy she got guilty, but never going to bring Frankie back.
Shay Groves is sentenced to life with a minimum term.
She was sentenced to 23 years, which is some sort of justice, but how many years she got, it's not the end for us.
So she'll be 50 years of age by the time she gets out. She's lost that relationship with her daughter. There's a heavy price to pay for that, all because of jealousy.
He might be gone, but he's left the most amazing memories. Love. 2 beautiful children that will always live in him. And I will miss him for the rest of my life.